The rain hammered against the windows of Meridian Bank as Matthew Evans knelt beneath a sink, wrench in hand, water pooling around his boots. Executives in tailored suits hurried past, barely acknowledging his presence. Just another invisible service worker. As Matthew tightened the final valve, alarms suddenly blared throughout the building. Through the commotion, he noticed something odd. A maintenance door, slightly ajar. When it should have been locked. While others panicked, his eyes narrowed with practiced precision. Could a plumber with worn hands possibly see what others had missed? Matthew Evans hadn't always been just a plumber. 8 years ago, he'd worn a different uniform. Navy SEAL turned FBI forensic specialist, with a reputation for spotting patterns others missed. Now, at 42, his credentials were buried beneath years of deliberately ordinary living. The elite training had been exchanged for pipe wrenches and a schedule that allowed him to raise his 10-year-old daughter, Emma, after her mother's death. The bank's new head of security, Alexandra Reeves, stood in the marble lobby, directing her team with crisp efficiency. At 38, she'd built her reputation on perfectionism and protocol. Former military intelligence, now private sector, with a no-nonsense demeanor that kept everyone at arm's length. Containment first, then assessment. No one enters or leaves until I give clearance, she ordered, her voice carrying authority without needing to raise it. Her team moved with practiced precision, securing exits and establishing a perimeter. Matthew observed from his peripheral vision while packing his tools. Alexandra hadn't noticed him. Few people did. But he'd noticed everything about her, the way she positioned herself with sightlines to all exits, how she kept her right side slightly angled away, concealed weapon, he assessed, and the subtle tells of someone who'd seen combat but worked hard to mask it. The bank manager approached her, agitation evident in his hurried steps. "Ms. Reeves, this is the third security anomaly this month. The board is getting concerned." "And they should be," she responded coolly. "These aren't random incidents. Someone's testing our systems." What neither realized was that Matthew had developed a habit of noticing things most missed. Not because he was trying to, he'd spent years trying not to, but because observation had been encoded into his neural pathways. He'd noticed the pattern in maintenance requests over the past 3 months, the timing of system tests, the new janitorial service that started just before the first incident. Emma was the reason he kept his head down. After losing her mother to cancer, his daughter needed stability, not danger, so he'd walked away from his former life, finding unexpected peace in honest work that let him be there for her each night, helping with homework, making pancakes on Sundays, and keeping the monsters, both imagined and real, at bay. 3 days later, Matthew returned to fix a persistent leak in the executive washroom. As he worked beneath the sink, voices drifted in from the adjacent conference room. "The audit team arrives next week. Everything must be immaculate," the bank manager insisted, tension evident in his voice. "The quarterly reports showed discrepancies in cash reserves," a woman responded. "Small amounts, but consistent. If the auditors dig deep enough." "They won't," a third voice interrupted. "Just make sure all documentation is in order." Matthew remained motionless, his trained ear catching the subtleties in their exchange. When the conference room door opened, he resumed working, appearing completely absorbed in his task. Later that afternoon, as closing time approached, alarms blared throughout the building. Not the testing kind, but the real thing. Security doors slammed shut. Customers dropped to the floor following practiced drill procedures. "Everyone remain calm," Alexandra's voice cut through the chaos. "This is not a drill. Security Protocol Alpha in effect." Through the confusion, Matthew observed 4 armed men emerging from what should have been a secured area. Their movements were coordinated, their timing impeccable. This wasn't an opportunistic robbery. It was meticulously planned. From his position near the maintenance hallway, Matthew noticed something the others missed. One of the bank's IT specialists, Tom Grayson, wasn't reacting with surprise. His eyes met briefly with one of the armed men, a silent communication that lasted less than a second but spoke volumes. As the robbers efficiently emptied specific cash drawers, Alexandra attempted to assess the situation without escalating it. Compliance is our priority, she instructed her team through barely moving lips. Let them take what they want. The robbery lasted precisely 6 minutes. The perpetrators disappeared through the loading dock, leaving behind shocked customers and staff. As police arrived and statements were taken, Matthew noticed Alexandra kneeling beside a ventilation grate, her expression intense. "You won't find anything there," he said quietly, approaching her after most had been evacuated. She turned sharply. "Excuse me?" It didn't come through the vents. They had help from inside. Alexandra's eyes narrowed. "And you know this how, exactly?" "Just an observation," he replied, deliberately minimizing his certainty. "That IT guy, Grayson, he wasn't surprised when it happened." "You're the plumber," she stated, recognition finally registering. "This isn't your concern." "It isn't," Matthew agreed, turning to leave. "Just thought you might want to know." As he walked away, he felt her eyes following him. Curious, suspicious, and perhaps, for the first time, really seeing him. The next morning, Matthew sat at his kitchen table. Newspaper spread before him as Emma ate breakfast. The headline blared, "Meredith Bank Robbery, 1.2 million stolen." "Dad, isn't that where you work sometimes?" Emma asked, milk dripping from her spoon. "It is, kiddo," he replied, scanning the article that reported no leads, no suspects. "Were you there? Were you scared?" Her eyes widened with concern that made his heart ache. "I wasn't scared," he said truthfully. "And sometimes things aren't as scary when you understand what's happening." After dropping Emma at school, Matthew drove to his storage unit across town. Hidden behind boxes of Christmas decorations was a locked case he hadn't opened in years. His fingers hesitated over the combination before decisively spinning the dials. Inside lay remnants of his former life, credentials, specialized equipment, and a laptop with security features most government agencies would envy. That evening, while checking the women's restroom plumbing at Meridian Bank, he strategically placed tiny receivers, not to eavesdrop, but to detect digital signatures of unauthorized devices. Old habits, old tools, repurposed. "You're here late," a voice observed from the doorway. Alexandra stood there, arms crossed, watching him with undisguised curiosity. "Just finishing up," Matthew replied, closing his toolbox. "Broken flush valve." "Interesting," she said, stepping closer. "Because I called for a plumber yesterday, and they said you weren't available until next week." Matthew maintained eye contact, his expression neutral. "My schedule opened up." "Did it now?" She leaned against the door frame. "You know, I ran a basic background check on you. Find anything interesting?" "That's just it. I found almost nothing. It's like you barely exist before 8 years ago." A moment of silence stretched between them. "Sometimes a simple life is the best choice," he finally said. "Simple doesn't mean invisible," she countered, "and people who notice things the way you do rarely choose invisible without good reason." Before he could respond, her phone buzzed. She checked it, frowning. "I have to go, but this conversation isn't over, Mr. Evans." Later that week, while fixing a water cooler on the executive floor, Matthew overheard a heated conversation between the bank manager and the board chairman. "The insurance claim is being processed, but they're asking questions about our security protocols," the manager said anxiously. "What about the internal investigation? Any progress?" the chairman demanded. "Reeves is thorough, but she's hitting walls. The footage was corrupted and the timing suggests insider knowledge." Matthew carefully recorded these details mentally while appearing absorbed in his work. When his phone vibrated with Emma's ringtone, reality snapped back into focus. "Hey, sweetie," he answered quietly. "Dad, can we have pizza tonight? Jenny's mom is taking her class for pizza, but I told her I'd rather have it with you instead." Something warm expanded in his chest. "Absolutely. I'll pick you up at 6 and we'll get the works." That evening, as they sat at their favorite pizza place, Emma chattering about her science project, Matthew noticed a familiar figure entering the restaurant. Alexandra Reeves paused at the hostess stand, her usual commanding presence softened by casual clothes and loosened hair. When she spotted him, surprise flickered across her face before she approached their table. "Mr. Evans?" she greeted him, then smiled at Emma. "And who might this be?" "I'm Emma," his daughter replied confidently, extending her hand just as he'd taught her. "Are you one of my dad's customers?" Alexandra shook her hand with appropriate seriousness. "In a way. Your dad fixed some problems at my workplace." "He's good at fixing things," Emma said proudly. "He fixed Mrs. Henderson's sink when nobody else could figure it out." "I believe that," Alexandra replied, something shifting in her assessment of him. "He notices things others miss." Matthew cleared his throat. "Would you like to join us? We ordered too much pizza anyway." The invitation surprised both of them. After a moment's hesitation, she accepted, sliding into the booth beside Emma. When Emma went to play the arcade games, Alexandra leaned forward. "She's remarkable." "She's everything," Matthew replied simply. "Is she why you disappeared?" His eyes met hers. "What makes you think I disappeared?" "Because I recognize the signs," she said quietly. "I know what it looks like when someone with training decides to go off-grid. The question is why?" Matthew studied her face, measuring risk against instinct. After Emma's mother died, priorities shifted. Some worlds aren't compatible with raising a child alone, and yet here you are inserting yourself into a dangerous situation. "I'm not inserting myself," he countered. "I'm just observing." "Well, your observations about Grayson were interesting enough that I've been watching him. Nothing concrete yet, but his behavior patterns have changed since the robbery." Matthew nodded slightly. "Check his financial records, not his main accounts. Look for recently established ones. And look into who installed your new security system 6 months ago." Alexandra's expression sharpened. "How do you know about the system upgrade timeline?" "I pay attention to work orders," he said simply. "That's all." As Emma bounded back to the table, excitement radiating from her success at skee-ball, Alexandra watched their interaction. A father, completely present with his daughter, nothing else mattering in that moment. The following Tuesday, Matthew arrived at Meridian Bank for scheduled maintenance and found the atmosphere charged with tension. Police officers conferred with Alexandra in the lobby, while employees whispered in clusters. "What happened?" he asked Julie, a teller he'd come to know through his regular visits. "Tom from IT was just escorted out by police," she whispered. "Something about suspicious transfers. Everyone's shocked. He's worked here for years." Matthew nodded, absorbing the information while setting up to work on a persistent leak in the ceiling near the vault corridor. From his vantage point on the ladder, he observed Alexandra directing her team, her movements precise, but tension evident in her shoulders. Hours later, as the bank closed for the day, she found him finishing his repairs. "You were right about Grayson," she acknowledged, checking that they were alone. "But he's just a small piece. The transactions we found were minimal compared to what was stolen." "L was the access point, not the mastermind," Matthew agreed, packing his tools. Alexandra studied him. "How did you know to look for separate accounts?" "It's a common pattern," he replied vaguely. "Among people with your background, maybe." She leaned against the wall. "I did a deeper check. Your records are good, would fool most people. But there are inconsistencies in your documented history that suggest professional redaction." Matthew stilled. "Ms. Reeves." "Alexandra," she corrected. "Alexandra. Whatever you think you've found, I'd suggest you consider why someone would erase their past so thoroughly. Those reasons usually merit respect." "I'm not threatening exposure," she clarified. "I'm offering collaboration, because I think you've figured out more than you're saying, and this isn't over." She was right. The robbery pattern matched others he'd analyzed years ago. A testing phase, followed by a moderate heist, culminating in a much larger operation. If the pattern held, the worst was yet to come. "I can't get officially involved," he said finally. "There are complications." "Then stay unofficial," she proposed. "Just keep noticing things." The conversation shifted something between them, an acknowledgement of capabilities. A tentative alliance formed. That night, after Emma was asleep, Matthew opened the file he'd been building. Surveillance photos taken from public cameras, maintenance records, security installation documentation, patterns emerged. Service interruptions coinciding with specific personnel rotations. Security upgrades that introduced subtle vulnerabilities rather than eliminating them. His phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number. Found something. Coffee? They met at a quiet diner the next morning. Alexandra looked different. Hair tied back, dressed in jeans and a sweater rather than her usual tailored suits. The security company that upgraded Meridian's systems 6 months ago. Premier Security Solutions, she began without preamble, sliding a file across the table. They've installed systems at 4 other banks in 3 states. 3 have been robbed within the past year. Matthew opened the file, scanning the contents with practiced efficiency. Who owns the company? That's where it gets interesting. On paper, it's owned by a holding company based in Delaware, which is owned by another holding company offshore. Layers of protection, Matthew murmured. Professional. The kind of professional that might prompt someone like you to walk away from a previous life? She asked quietly. His eyes met hers. What exactly do you think I used to do? Something that trained you to notice patterns others miss. Something government-adjacent that taught you about financial crimes and electronic surveillance. Something that ended badly enough to make you choose plumbing and parenthood instead. The waitress arrived with coffee, interrupting the moment. When she left, Matthew spoke carefully. 8 years ago, I was part of a joint FBI Treasury task force, investigating a series of seemingly unrelated bank robberies across the country. We identified a pattern. Sophisticated, patient criminals who infiltrated institutions months before making their move. Like what's happening now, Alexandra noted. Similar, yes. We got close to identifying the organization behind it. Then, an operation went wrong. His voice remained steady, but his eyes revealed the cost. My partner was killed. The official report cited operational error. Specifically, mine. But that's not what happened, she deduced. What happened was we had someone on the inside. When we got too close, they burned us. His hands tightened around his coffee cup. After Ellen, my wife, died 2 years later, I had a choice. Keep fighting an organization that had already infiltrated federal agencies, or protect what mattered most. Emma, Alexandra supplied softly. I couldn't risk leaving her an orphan. So I disappeared, with help from the few people I still trusted. Alexandra absorbed this, her analytical mind connecting pieces. And now you think the same organization is operating at Meridian. I know they are, he corrected. The question is how deep the infiltration goes, and what their endgame is. The 1.2 million was just a test, a distraction from their real purpose. Which is? Based on the pattern, they're setting up for something much bigger. The quarterly audit next week presents the perfect opportunity. Alexandra leaned forward. The Federal Reserve is transferring 50 million through Meridian as part of a regional cash repositioning. Matthew's expression darkened. That's their target. As they strategize next steps. His phone rang. Emma's school. His daughter had fallen during gym class and needed to be picked up. Life's competing priorities crystallized in that moment. I have to go, he said, standing. Alexandra nodded. Go. I'll keep digging into Premier Security's personnel records. As he turned to leave, she caught his arm. Matthew, be careful. If this is the same organization and they recognize you, the unspoken danger hung between them. He nodded once, acknowledgement and promise combined. That evening, as he helped Emma with her math homework, his phone vibrated with another text from Alexandra. We have a problem. Principal and 2 guards replaced last month. Backgrounds check out too perfectly. The infiltration was worse than he thought. 3 days before the Federal Reserve transfer, Matthew arrived at Meridian Bank under the pretense of a complete plumbing system check. His real purpose, to map the subtle changes in security protocols that had been implemented since the robbery. Alexandra had arranged access to areas normally restricted to maintenance personnel, drawing curious glances from her team. Ms. Reeves seems to think very highly of your plumbing skills, commented Edward Morris, the bank's operations director, his tone suggesting he found this unusual. Just thorough, Matthew replied mildly, focusing on the control panel he was ostensibly checking for water damage. Indeed, and convenient, that you're able to inspect every section of our infrastructure so close to our federal audit, Morris continued, watching him closely. Matthew recognized the probing for what it was: assessment of a potential threat. Morris had been with the bank for 15 years, well respected, above suspicion. But then, the best infiltrators always were. Happy to come back another time if it's disruptive, Matthew offered. No, by all means continue. We want everything in perfect working order. Morris smiled thinly before walking away. Later, in the relative privacy of a maintenance corridor, Alexandra joined him. Morris is watching you, she warned. He's supposed to, Matthew replied, continuing his work. It would be suspicious if he wasn't concerned about a plumber accessing sensitive areas. What have you found? The new security cameras have a 3-second delay loop, nearly imperceptible unless you're looking for it. And the vault's biometric scanner has been recalibrated to accept a broader range of fingerprint matches. Alexandra processed this, making it easier to bypass with synthetic prints. Exactly. Have you identified any other personnel changes? 2 security guards and a vault manager, all within the last 6 months, all with credentials that check out perfectly. Too perfectly, Matthew murmured. What about the Federal Reserve transfer? Scheduled for Thursday, armored truck arrives at 10 a.m. Standard protocol. Matthew finished his work on the panel, replacing the cover. They'll make their move during the transfer, when the vault is open and the money is accessible. We need to be ready. I've requested additional security, but Morris overruled me, said it would create unnecessary concern among customers and visiting officials. Of course he did, Matthew said grimly. He's one of them. As they parted ways, Matthew felt a familiar tension building, the precursor to events that couldn't be undone. That evening, after tucking Emma into bed, he made a difficult call to his former partner's widow, Rachel. I need a favor, he said when she answered. It's about Emma. They found you, didn't they? Rachel asked, immediately understanding. Not yet, but I'm involved in something that might get complicated. Bring her here, Rachel said without hesitation. We'll keep her safe until it's over. The next morning he drove Emma to Rachel's home 2 hours away, explaining that he had an emergency job requiring overnight work. Is this like when you used to go away for work, before Mom got sick? Emma asked perceptibly, watching his face. Sometimes he forgot how observant she was, how much she remembered from before. A little bit, he admitted. But not for long. You're not just a plumber, are you, Dad? She asked quietly. He chose his words carefully. Everyone is more than just their job, kiddo. But being your dad, that's the most important part of who I am. Thursday morning arrived with a sense of inevitability. Matthew entered Meridian Bank carrying his usual tools, plus some that hadn't seen use in 8 years. Alexandra met him near the employee entrance, her professional demeanor firmly in place despite the tension between them. Everything set? He asked quietly. She nodded imperceptibly. I've positioned trusted personnel at key points and implemented secondary verification protocols without informing Morris. Good. Stay visible, but not obvious. We need to let this play out enough to identify all involved. The morning proceeded with deceptive normalcy. Customers conducting business, employees at their stations. At 9:45, the bank manager assembled key personnel in the main conference room for a final briefing before the Federal Reserve transfer. Matthew positioned himself near the vault corridor, ostensibly fixing a persistent leak. From there he could observe both the conference room and the secure entrance where the armored truck would arrive. At precisely 9:52, the first anomaly occurred. A momentary flicker in the lights, followed by the security system resetting. Scheduled system test, announced Morris smoothly over the internal communication system. Proceed with normal operations. But Matthew recognized it for what it was, the first phase of the takeover. Through earbuds disguised as hearing protection, he heard Alexandra's voice. Backup systems engaged. They don't know we've duplicated the security feeds. At 10 o'clock, the armored truck arrived. As vault protocols initiated, Matthew noticed 4 security personnel he didn't recognize moving into position. Morris emerged from the conference room, walking with deliberate calm toward the vault. Everything happened at once. The lights cut completely, emergency systems engaged, and the unfamiliar security team produced weapons, their movements synchronized with practiced precision. "Nobody moves," shouted the leader. "This is a security situation. Everyone on the floor." Customers dropped down, some screaming, bank employees froze in confusion. In the choreographed chaos, Matthew saw Morris swiping a card at the vault entrance, bypassing normal dual authentication protocols. It was time. Matthew pressed a signal device in his pocket, alerting Alexandra. Then he deliberately dropped his toolbox, the loud clatter drawing attention. "You there, down on the floor." One of the armed men approached him. Matthew complied slowly, hands visible. "Just a plumber," he said, his posture submissive. The man moved closer, weapon trained on him. In the background, Morris and two others were entering the vault, where the Federal Reserve transfer was being prepared. "I said down," the man repeated. "Close enough now." Matthew moved with a speed that belied his everyday appearance. The weapon was redirected, the man disarmed and incapacitated within seconds. Across the room, Alexandra and her trusted team members were simultaneously neutralizing the other imposters. "Federal agents!" came a shout from the main entrance as the backup Alexandra had quietly arranged stormed in, identifying themselves. Morris emerged from the vault, shock registering when he saw the operation falling apart. His hand moved toward his jacket. "I wouldn't," Matthew said calmly, now holding the weapon taken from his attacker. "It's over, Edward." "You," Morris hissed, recognition finally dawning. "You're supposed to be dead." "Disappointed?" Matthew asked, keeping him covered as federal agents approached. "You have no idea what you're interfering with," Morris snarled. "This goes higher than you can imagine." "I'm just a plumber," Matthew replied evenly. "Fixing leaks is what I do." As Morris was taken into custody, the bank manager approached Alexandra, bewilderment evident. "What just happened? Who authorized this operation?" "I did," came a new voice. A woman in a tailored suit entered, presenting credentials. "FBI Special Agent Diane Foster. We've been tracking this organization for years." "Years?" the manager repeated weakly. "They infiltrate financial institutions, positioning for major heists. The earlier robbery was just a test. This was their real target." She turned to Matthew. "Thank you for your assistance, Mr. Evans. Your observations were invaluable." Matthew nodded once, already moving toward the exit. His part was done. Outside, Alexandra caught up with him. "You're leaving?" "My cover's blown," he said simply. "It's not safe to stay. The FBI will want a statement, your testimony." "Foster knows how to reach me," he interrupted. "I need to get to Emma." Understanding crossed her face. "Of course." As he turned to go, she caught his arm. "Matthew, what you did in there—" "What needed doing," he finished for her. "Not everyone would have stepped up knowing the risks." He met her eyes directly. "Some things are worth the risk." 2 weeks later, Matthew and Emma had relocated to a rental house across town. The investigation had yielded results faster than expected. Morris and 8 others were in custody. Matthew was replacing a shower fixture when his phone vibrated with a text from Alexandra. "Coffee, have something to show you." They met at the same quiet diner. She slid a file folder across the table, containing a surveillance photo from 6 years ago. The man with Morris was Victor Reiner. The name Matthew's partner was investigating when he was killed. "Foster thinks Morris was working for him even then," Alexandra said quietly. "Which means they knew about our investigation from the beginning." The implications settled heavily. "Does Foster have a current location on Reiner?" "Not yet. But they're closer than they've ever been," she hesitated. She also mentioned, "Your record has been officially cleared. The findings from your partner's death have been revised." Matthew absorbed this silently. Vindication, after all these years, but at what cost? "Foster offered me a position with their financial crimes division," Alexandra added. "Are you going to take it?" "I'm considering it." Their eyes met across the table. "What about you?" "The FBI would welcome you back." Matthew shook his head. "That life is behind me." "Is it?" she asked softly. "Because the man I saw at Meridian Bank wasn't just a plumber." "No," he acknowledged. "But he wasn't an agent either. He was a father who couldn't stand by while people were endangered. Sunday morning, Matthew stood at the stove making pancakes when the doorbell rang. Emma raced to answer it, calling over her shoulder, "I'll check who it is first." He heard her voice, asking, "Who is it?" through the door, followed by a muffled response. Then, Emma's excited, "Dad, it's Miss Reeves." Alexandra stood on their porch, holding a paper bag. "I brought coffee," she explained. After breakfast, Emma went to work on her science project, leaving them alone at the table. "I heard from Foster yesterday," Alexandra said. "They've identified 3 more banks with potential infiltration, based on the pattern you helped establish. Foster mentioned again that they could use your expertise even as a consultant." She watched his face. "Just thought you should know the option exists." "And what about you? Have you decided about Foster's offer?" "I have," she confirmed. "I start in 2 weeks. The position allows me to stay local, which is important." The implication hung between them. From Emma's room came the sound of laughter as she video-chatted with a friend. The normalcy of it reinforced what mattered most. "You know," Alexandra said thoughtfully, "there are many ways to make a difference. Not all of them require a badge or a gun. Or a wrench," he added with a slight smile. "The point is, you don't have to choose between being a father and using your abilities to help others." She met his eyes directly. "You've proven that already." Later, as Alexandra prepared to leave, she hesitated, then added, "Foster also mentioned something else. They've identified a possible location for Rayner." Matthew stilled. "Where?" "Miami, operating under a new identity." "I should get going," Alexandra said, opening her car door. "Emma's science project awaits." "Alexandra," he said as she was about to slide into the driver's seat, "I'm not ready to go back to that life. But if Foster needs insights on how these people operate, off the record, no field involvement, I'd be willing to help." She smiled, understanding the significance of this concession. "I'll let her know." As her car disappeared down the street, Matthew stood in the driveway, feeling something he hadn't experienced in years. The quiet certainty of making the right choice, not just the necessary one. As Matthew drove home from his final service call at Meridian Bank, he reflected on how life had shifted in subtle but significant ways. He was still a plumber, still found satisfaction in honest work that let him be there for Emma each day. But he was also occasionally consulting with Agent Foster, providing insights that helped identify and prevent financial crimes before they happened. When Emma asked if he and Ms. Reeves were going to catch more bad guys together, he looked down at his perceptive daughter. "I help when I can," he said finally, "in ways that let me be here for you." Emma nodded, accepting this. "I think Mom would like Ms. Reeves," she said thoughtfully. "She notices things too, like you." Matthew's throat tightened unexpectedly. "I think you're right, kiddo." As he tucked her in that night, Matthew realized that the journey from who he had been to who he was becoming wasn't a straight line. It curved and doubled back, but ultimately flowed toward what mattered most. The plumber who had once been more, now becoming something new entirely, not defined by either past or present, but by the choices that served both justice and family. Not a hero in the conventional sense, but perhaps something more sustainable. A man who had learned